Officer Brian Keller's duty boots crunched over the spotless sidewalk of Brookhaven's most exclusive block. His gaze locked on the black man in a tailored navy suit, and his lip curled with open disgust. "What the hell you think you're doing here, boy?" Keller's voice cracked across the quiet morning like a whip. The man turned slowly, posture calm, voice low. "Officer, Shut your mouth!" Keller snapped, already stepping into his space. Keller seized the man's wrist, twisting it roughly so the expensive watch caught the sun. "That a real Rolex or something you lifted?" he sneered. "You breaking into these homes?" With a shove, he forced the man backward. "Turn around! Hands behind your back!" "Officer, please!" The man barely finished before Keller slammed him against a gleaming luxury sedan. The metallic thud echoed down the manicured street. "I said, turn around! You piece of crap! You don't belong here!" The man's immaculate suit bunched and wrinkled against the hood, yet his voice stayed steady, anger buried under control. "I live in this house," he said, nodding toward the stately brick colonial behind them. Keller barked out a bitter laugh. "Sure you do, and I'm the damn president." For a moment, the only sounds were distant sprinklers and a barking dog. Have you ever seen that kind of raw, humiliating hate aimed at someone just for existing? 9:47 a.m. 13 minutes until the call. Darius Coleman felt the chilled metal of his BMW's hood pressed against his chest. 27 years of federal service, and he was being treated like some street-level thug on his own driveway. "ID, now!" Keller demanded, breath reeking of stale coffee and attitude. Darius moved slowly, deliberately, every motion calculated. One wrong gesture, and this could spiral. His fingers found the Italian leather wallet, a promotion gift from his wife, Nia. Keller snatched the wallet from his hand, rifling through it like he expected drugs or a fake license to tumble out. "Darius Coleman," he read, mocking the cadence. "What kind of made-up name is that?" "It's my name, officer." Keller flipped a card between his fingers. Federal Credit Union Platinum, embossed and slightly worn. "Where'd you swipe this from?" he demanded. "This one's government-issued." He sounded offended by the idea that anything in Darius's life could be legitimately earned. Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez's live stream had already started rolling. She held her phone chest high, whispering into the camera so the officers wouldn't hear. "This is disgusting. He lives here. I've watched him leave for work every weekday for 3 years." Notifications chimed as viewers poured into the stream. The little heart and angry face icons floated across her screen like frantic fireflies. The audience building with every second of recorded outrage. Comments started stacking up in real time. "Call the FBI. This is 2025, not 1955. Sue the department into the ground." But the darker voices slithered in from faceless accounts. "He looks shady as hell, definitely casing the neighborhood. These people don't belong in places like that." Keller's radio crackled to life. "Unit 47 requesting backup on Maple Drive." "Copy, 47. Unit 23 en route." The coded chatter turned the quiet cul-de-sac into a stage. Darius's phone buzzed in his pocket. Caller ID. Director Pierce, FBI. A name that could have ended everything with one clarified sentence. He declined the call, eyes flicking to his Omega Seamaster. The Platinum Federal Credit Union card wasn't the only thing Keller had ignored. On Darius's lapel, a small eagle pin glinted. the kind you'd only recognize if you'd ever sat in the right rooms. "You got a permit to be in this neighborhood, boy?" Keller shoved the wallet back into Darius's chest like it offended him. "People here pay good money to make sure your kind stay out," he said. "Officer Keller," Darius read from the nameplate with cool precision as if logging evidence. "I'm going to ask you to take a step back." "You're going to ask me?" Keller's hand slid toward his taser. "You giving me orders now?" The rising siren of another patrol car made Darius's jaw tighten. This was unfolding exactly like the scenarios from his civil rights training modules. Multiple officers, upscale residential backdrop, almost no in-person witnesses except the ones holding phones. The perfect storm for abuse and denial, if not for social media. Officer Jenna Price climbed from the second cruiser, scanning the scene with one quick, practice sweep, one cuff-ready black man, one amped-up cop. Keller waved her over. "Got a suspicious subject. Claims he lives in the Lawson place." Price eyed the towering colonial behind them, easily a $2 million property. Then her gaze slid back to Darius, taking in the tailored suit, the watch, the calm expression that didn't quite fit the suspect label. Her face hardened anyway. "Do you have any documentation showing you live here?" she asked, voice professional but edged with doubt. Slowly, Darius reached toward his inner jacket pocket. Both officers tensed, hands hovering near their weapons like choreography they'd practiced. Darius produced a set of keys, spreading them so they dangled from his fingers. The distinctive BMW fob, the thick brass house key, the small mailbox key, worn smooth from use. "Front door, car, mailbox," he said evenly. Keller snatched the ring, inspecting each key like it might confess. Could have copied these. Could have boosted the car. Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez raised her voice. "Officers, he's lived there for 3 years. His name's on the mailbox." "Ma'am, step back from the scene," Price called, though she kept her eyes on Darius. "We're conducting an investigation." "Investigation into what?" Mrs. Alvarez shot back, camera still rolling. "A man standing on his own driveway?" 9:52 a.m. 8 minutes left. Darius's phone buzzed again. Same caller, same decline. This time, the corner of his mouth twitched upward, a tiny, dangerous smile. Keller was too busy rattling the keys to notice the shift in his demeanor. "Something funny to you, boy?" Keller's voice rose another octave, aggression feeding on itself. "You think this is a joke?" "No, officer," Darius replied calmly. "I think this is exactly what I anticipated." The comment landed wrong, like a hidden insult Keller couldn't quite decode. "Anticipated?" he repeated. "You saying you planned this?" More doors opened along the cul-de-sac. The Bakers from next door stepped onto their porch, phones ready, and Mrs. Green paused mid-dog walk to stare. The Parker twins slowed their morning jog, curiosity overtaking cardio. Some faces showed worry, others an ugly satisfaction, like the scene confirmed quiet fears they'd never admit publicly. And then Karen Hale appeared from the corner lot, her HOA coordinator badge clipped proudly to her neon running jacket. She'd never once welcomed Darius to the neighborhood. "Officers," Karen said, walking up like she owned the street, "we've had a string of break-ins. Better safe than sorry." Price nodded toward Karen with visible appreciation. "You hear that? The community's concerned about security." "I've lived here since 2022, Darius replied quietly. "I've never met any HOA coordinator at my door." Karen's eyes went cold. "Because you're not supposed to be here," she said flatly. "This neighborhood has standards." Mrs. Alvarez's stream tipped into viral territory, over 2,000 live viewers and climbing. Local outlets were already getting tagged. A link popped up for Brookhaven racial profiling. Hashtags started crystallizing in real time. A justice for Darius. Brookhaven bias. Black culture stories. But Darius wasn't watching any of it. His focus stayed on his watch, counting seconds in the space between humiliation and consequence. A tiny encrypted icon pulsed twice at the edge of the display. His federal contact was losing patience. "You know what?" Keller stepped closer, crowding Darius's personal space until their noses were almost level. "I think we're taking a ride downtown. Let detectives sort this out." "On what charge?" Darius asked, voice still controlled. "Trespassing! Disturbing the peace! Failure to comply with lawful orders!" Keller snapped, listing them like items on a menu he'd memorized. Darius locked eyes with him. "Officer, I strongly advise you to wait." "Wait for what, genius?" Keller shot back. "You'll find out," Darius answered. 9:56 a.m. 4 minutes to go. The handcuffs bit into his wrists as Keller pinned him against the patrol car, suit scraping on chipped paint. The steel tightened, leaving faint grooves on Darius's skin. Keller's voice dripped satisfaction as he started the Miranda warning. "You have the right to remain silent." "Officer Keller," Darius interrupted, tone slicing through the rehearsed script. "Badge number 5529. I want you to remember that number." Keller hesitated mid-sentence. "What did you say?" "Your badge," Darius repeated, eyes unwavering. 5529. Don't forget it." Something in his measured delivery made Keller's confidence flicker just for an instant. Then the officer's insecurity hardened into rage. "You threatening me, boy?" "I'm just asking you to remember who you are in this moment," Darius replied. 9:58 a.m. 2 minutes remaining. A third patrol car rolled up, more cautious than the first two. Sergeant Luis Herrera climbed out, 15 years of experience visible in the weary way he scanned the scene. Handcuffed black homeowner, 2 keyed-up officers, gathering crowd, phones pointed like weapons. "What have we got?" he asked. "Trespassing suspect," Price reported briskly. "Claims he lives in the Lawson house." Herrera studied the sprawling brick home, the manicured lawn, then Darius's tailored suite and composed expression. The pieces didn't quite fit his instincts, but procedure was procedure. "Any ID?" he asked. Keller waved the wallet. "Says he's Darius Coleman. Probably fake. Same with this federal credit card." Herrera took the card, inspecting it more carefully. "These are hard to counterfeit," he murmured, frowning. "Probably stolen," Karen cut in, stepping closer as if she were part of the department. "I'm the HOA coordinator. I know everyone who belongs here." Mrs. Alvarez's livestream had exploded past 8,000 viewers. Her comment section burned. "Where are the civil rights lawyers? Somebody tag the FBI. Fire those racist cops." But counter comments clawed back. "Good cops doing their job." "He doesn't fit the neighborhood." News vans were already on the way. One reporter had been DM'd the link. Herrera studied Darius again. The man's composure was off, not the jittery panic of someone caught doing dirt, not the unfiltered outrage of an innocent person wrongly accused. Something more controlled, like he was quietly grading them. "Mr. Coleman, any way you can confirm you live here?" Herrera asked. The keys your officer took opened my front door, my car, and my mailbox, Darius replied. Mrs. Alvarez can verify I've lived across from her for 3 years. Keys can be duplicated, Keller snapped. Cars can be stolen. Herrera still wasn't convinced, but the crowd was thickening and shifting like a restless tide. The Bakers now filmed openly. Mrs. Green had called her husband, who stood beside her in house slippers, arms crossed. The Parker twins had stopped running entirely and were live-streaming their own angles. Look, Herrera said, trying to calm everything down. Let's just verify his address. No harm in... No, Keller cut him off, stepping forward, voice cracking with stubbornness. I'm not playing these games. He's trespassing. He's been argumentative, and now he's making threats. What threats? Herrera asked sharply. Told me to remember my badge number, Keller insisted. That's intimidation. Darius's phone rang again. The third time. The screen flashed for everyone nearby. Director Pierce, FBI. Keller grabbed it. Drug dealer calling, he sneered. Or your parole officer? He thumbed the answer button without hesitation. Yeah, this is Officer Keller, he said, oozing smugness. Your boy Darius is under arrest. You want to post bail? Call the station. The voice on the other end was sharp, clipped, used to being obeyed. Excuse me? It said. I said your buddy's under arrest, Keller repeated. Take it up with booking. Officer, this is FBI Director Naomi Pierce. I need to speak with Agent Coleman immediately. Keller's smirk faltered. FBI? Yeah, sure. And I'm the governor. Herrera stepped closer, instincts flaring. Keller, hang up, he muttered, suddenly uneasy. But Keller doubled down. Listen, whoever you are, he said into the phone, this is a local police matter. Your guy is going downtown. Agent Coleman is a federal officer, Pierce replied, voice dropping to ice. I am ordering you to release him immediately. Keller laughed, brittle and too loud. This guy's a criminal. The line went dead. 9:59 a.m. 1 minute left. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush bone. Herrera stared at Keller like he'd just watched him drive off a cliff. Price's eyes went wide, uncertainty creeping in. What if that was real? She whispered. It wasn't, Keller insisted, but conviction was gone from his tone. It's some kind of setup. Mrs. Alvarez's live stream hit 15,000 viewers. Comments streamed too quickly to read. 3 news vans swung into the subdivision, logos flashing. Darius stayed motionless against the cruiser, cuffs tight, shoulders straight. Only his eyes moved, tracking his watch. The encrypted icon pulsed. Federal response authorized. Officers, he said quietly, his voice carrying that strange, unshakable authority. I'm giving you one more chance to de-escalate. Shut up, Keller snapped, but he sounded rattled now. Karen tried to steady the narrative. I don't care who he pretends to be, she announced. This is a protected community. We have rules. Actually, Mrs. Alvarez shouted from across the street, this isn't a gated community, Karen, and he pays more in property taxes than you do. A rumble moved through the crowd. More neighbors had gathered, matching faces to rumors. Phones up. Some whispering apologies, others whispering excuses. Herrera wiped sweat from his brow. 15 years on the job told him this was about to go very wrong, very publicly. The federal card, the phone call, the strange composure, too many warning signs. Keller, maybe we should, Herrera began. No, Keller barked, voice cracking. "I'm not backing down for some—" He stopped himself, but the missing word hung in the air like smoke. Darius turned his head, gaze locking onto him. "Some what, officer?" The noise on the street died instantly. Even the live stream comments seemed to slow. "You know exactly what you were about to say," Darius continued, tone deadly calm. "Go ahead. Say it out loud." Keller's jaw flexed, but nothing came. 10 a.m. The call! Darius's phone rang for the fourth time, buzzing against Keller's palm. "I think you should answer," Darius said. Herrera reached toward the device, but Keller yanked it away, clinging to control. "No, I've got this," he insisted, thumb stabbing at the accept button. Keller, speaking. "Officer Brian Keller," the voice said immediately. "This is FBI Director Naomi Pierce. I am ordering you to remove those handcuffs. Now." "I don't care who you think you are," Keller snapped. "Badge number 5529. Officer Brian Keller, Brookhaven Police Department. 12 years on the force, 17 citizen complaints in the last 2 years, 89% involving people of color." Keller's face drained of color. Herrera stepped closer, trying to hear. "You have exactly 60 seconds to take those cuffs off, or I start dispatching federal agents to your location," Pierce finished. The line went dead again. "Merciless!" Keller stared at the phone, hand trembling just enough for Darius to notice. "Federal agents?" Price whispered. Herrera was already reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 12. I need to talk to Chief Langston immediately," he said. But it was too late for internal damage control. At the far end of Maple Drive, 3 black SUVs appeared, gliding through Brookhaven like sharks through calm water. Their tinted windows and federal plates said, "Everything." The SUVs rolled to a stop in a precise formation that screamed training and authority. Keller swallowed hard. "Those can't be federal," Herrera finished quietly. His own radio crackled with confusion from dispatch. "Chief Langston is en route, but there are unlogged vehicles already on scene." Darius finally allowed himself a small smile. He stayed cuffed, back against the cruiser, but his energy shifted from cornered prey to something closer to a patient hunter watching the trap close. "Officer Keller," Darius said without turning, "take another look at my lapel pin." Keller's gaze dropped to the small eagle insignia he'd dismissed. In the morning light, the detail became obvious. Not costume jewelry, but official sterling. "What is that?" he asked, voice rough. "FBI service pin," Darius replied. 27 years. The words hit like a baton. Price took an involuntary step back. Herrera closed his eyes for a second, whispering a prayer under his breath. From the lead SUV, a tall black woman stepped out, moving with the steady confidence of someone who never had to shout to be obeyed. FBI Director Naomi Pierce's charcoal suit was razor-sharp, her expression carved from granite. Mrs. Alvarez's live stream exploded again, 22,000 viewers and climbing. Comments flashed, "He really is FBI. Those cops are done. Better pick this up." Behind Pierce, 6 more agents emerged, coordinated in dark suits and earpieces, moving like a unit. Karen began edging backward, her HOA badge now feeling like a toy in a war zone. "Agent Coleman," Pierce called, voice carrying cleanly over the murmuring crowd. "Status report." Darius finally turned, the handcuffs forcing his shoulders into an awkward angle. "Currently detained by Officer Keller, badge number 5529, on suspicion of trespassing," he answered. "Trespassing on your own property?" Pierce asked. Apparently so, Darius replied. Pierce's gaze sliced across Keller, Price, and Herrera in one assessing sweep. Officer Keller, she said, we've spoken twice this morning. Keller's reply came out as a croak. You're really FBI. Director Naomi Pierce, Federal Bureau of Investigation, she replied, flashing her credentials with practiced efficiency. Agent Coleman is my assistant director for the Civil Rights Division. The crowd reacted like someone had detonated a flashbang. Assistant Director, Civil Rights. Herrera's thoughts raced. Federal oversight, internal affairs, consent decrees. Ma'am, we responded to a call about suspicious activity, he began. Suspicious activity? Pierce repeated, voice sharp enough to cut steel. A federal agent standing in his own driveway? We didn't know who he was, Price said quickly. You didn't know because you didn't ask, Pierce shot back. You saw a black man in an affluent neighborhood and made a series of assumptions. On the sidewalk, the Bakers looked mortified. Mrs. Green kept whispering, "Oh my God," like a prayer. The Parker twins were now broadcasting to their own followers. Pierce ignored the spectators entirely, her focus locked on Keller. Officer Keller, how many complaints have been filed against you in the last 24 months? I don't know the exact number, he stammered. 17, Pierce answered smoothly. 89% involving people of color. Would you like me to read them? Keller's knees almost buckled. That's not relevant to April 2023. Excessive force complaint, dismissed. June 2023. Racial profiling allegation, sustained. August 2023. Inappropriate language. Verbal warning. Stop, Herrera interjected, stepping forward, desperation creeping into his tone. Director Pierce, we're deeply sorry about this. We'll release Agent Coleman immediately. Pierce lifted a hand and he stopped mid-sentence. I'm not done, she said. October 2023. Unlawful detention, settled quietly. November 2023. Harassment complaint. December 2023. Another racial bias report, closed on a technicality. January 2024. Why are you doing this? Keller whispered, voice cracking, the weight of his record finally landing. Pierce closed the distance between them by one deliberate step. Because Assistant Director Coleman has spent the last 22 months investigating systemic bias in law enforcement, she said. This encounter is being documented as part of a federal civil rights case study. The entire block went silent. Mrs. Alvarez's hands shook around her phone. She realized she was filming a live federal investigation. Case study? Price echoed, barely audible. Operation Mirror, Pierce confirmed. You're looking at yourself. Agent Coleman has been tracking patterns across 47 departments nationwide, Pierce continued. Brookhaven PD made the list based on complaint ratios and demographics. Darius spoke, his voice low but carrying. I chose this neighborhood on purpose. High-end, mostly white history of suspicious person calls for nothing more than existing while black. Keller stared at him, horror dawning. You set us up, he said. I bought a house and stood in my own driveway, Darius replied. The rest was voluntary. Herrera scrambled for anything salvageable. Assistant Director Coleman, we apologize for any misunderstanding. Sergeant Herrera, Pierce cut in. Your department receives $2.3 million in federal funding every year. Civil rights violations can trigger oversight and budget reviews. The financial threat hit him harder than any punch. Federal grants paid for training, body cams, half their vehicles. Pierce gestured to one of her agents, who stepped forward with bolt cutters. "Remove those restraints," she ordered. The handcuffs dropped from Darius's wrists with a sharp metallic clink that felt louder than a gunshot. He flexed his hands, restoring circulation, then smoothed his suit jacket back into place. For the first time, he looked fully like what he was, a seasoned federal agent with nearly 3 decades of experience and the weight of the government behind him. "Officer Keller," Darius said calmly, "do you remember what I told you about that badge number?" Keller nodded numbly. "This incident is now permanently attached to it," Darius continued. "Badge 5529, Officer Brian Keller, unlawful detention of a federal agent, civil rights violation, abuse of authority." Mrs. Alvarez's stream crossed 45,000 live viewers. In the distance, news helicopters carved arcs across the sky, rotors beating the message outward. This wasn't a quiet little neighborhood dust-up anymore. Reporter Tasha Moore from Channel 7 arrived, too late for the takedown, just in time for the fallout. She began positioning her crew for aftermath interviews, cameras swiveling between Pierce, Darius, the officers, and the stunned neighbors. Karen tried to slip away toward her house, but Pierce's voice cut through the hum. "Ms. Hale, HOA coordinator," she called. "Earlier you stated that Assistant Director Coleman didn't belong here." Karen froze, spine stiffening. I was mistaken," she stammered. "You were discriminatory," Pierce corrected. "Your words are also part of the federal record now." More federal vehicles arrived, including a mobile command van that made the whole scene feel like something from a procedural drama. Except it was gnawingly real. Herrera keyed his radio, voice flat. "All units stand down. Federal operation in progress." But Chief Langston's unmarked sedan was already pulling up, his expression the color of old concrete. Pierce turned toward the crowd and the cluster of cameras, her posture shifting from investigator to educator. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "and what you witnessed here is not an isolated misunderstanding," Pierce said. "It is systemic bias playing out in real time." She gestured toward Keller. Officer Keller saw a black man in an expensive neighborhood and drew conclusions based solely on race and perceived status. Her hand moved toward Darius. "Assistant Director Coleman purchased his home in 2022. He pays $47,000 a year in property taxes. He has lived here peacefully for 3 years. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. $47,000 in property taxes meant the house was worth well over $2 million. Numbers had a way of forcing reality onto people who ignored everything else. Today's event will be included in a comprehensive analysis on law enforcement bias, Pierce continued. Those findings will be presented to Congress next month. Keller sat heavily in the front seat of his cruiser, head buried in his hands. The full collapse of his career was no longer theoretical. It was visible. Price stood rigid beside him, looking like she wanted to disappear into the pavement. Herrera mentally tallied the potential fallout: lawsuits, oversight committees, mandatory retraining, years of reputation repair. A few neighbors began drifting away, suddenly late for work, not wanting their faces in the footage they'd eagerly recorded. Others stayed rooted, unable to look away from the wreckage of certainty. The cameras kept rolling, lenses unblinking, capturing every flinch, every whispered apology, every bitter glance. Darius took a slow breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. He hadn't wanted the humiliation, but he had expected the pattern. Training simulations rarely captured the sting of living it for real. Pierce turned back to him. Assistant Director, anything you wish to add for the record? He glanced at Keller, then at the crowd. Just this, he said. I didn't come here to trap anyone. I came here to live. The system wrote the script. Several people shifted uncomfortably. The Parker twins lowered their phones for the first time. Mrs. Green wiped at tears she didn't fully understand. Karen hugged her arms around herself, suddenly very small without her badge, and borrowed authority. If you're angry, Darius went on, be angry at the choices, not the cameras. None of this would exist if someone had simply asked, "Sir, do you live here?" instead of deciding the answer beforehand. The truth hung there, undeniable. Pierce nodded, satisfied. Federal observers will remain in Brookhaven for a period of time, she announced. Our goal is not to destroy this department, but to ensure it serves every resident fairly. That will mean policy changes, training, and accountability. Herrera exhaled slowly, understanding that this was the best outcome they could hope for under the circumstances. Federal funding would be reviewed, but not necessarily cut, if they cooperated. If they learned something from the mirror being held up. One of Pierce's agents stepped forward with a tablet, quietly briefing her on incoming media requests and the surge in online coverage. The footage from this morning is already trending nationwide, he said. Civil rights organizations are asking for statements. Pierce nodded. We'll coordinate with public affairs, she replied. Behind her, technicians began setting up inside the mobile command van, pulling feeds from the various live streams, preserving every angle of the incident for the investigation and the report. Darius walked a slow circle around his BMW, reclaiming his space inch by inch. Keller watched him through the windshield, haunted. "Officer Keller," Darius called, stopping near the front bumper. Keller reluctantly rolled down the window. "Yeah, sir?" The title sounded foreign in his mouth. "For the rest of your career, if you still have one, remember today. Remember that it took federal agents and thousands of strangers online to convince you I belonged in my own driveway." News helicopters hovered closer now, the thrum of their blades turning Maple Drive into a stage lit from above. Tasha Moore filmed a stand-up, microphone in hand, summarizing what viewers had already watched live on their phones. Behind her, Pierce spoke quietly with Chief Langston, outlining the immediate steps. Internal suspension for Keller, full review of use of force patterns, mandatory bias training for every officer on the roster. The chief nodded, looking 20 years older than he had an hour earlier. "I'm Ms. Hale," Pierce said again, stopping Karen as she tried to vanish into her house. "Yes?" Karen whispered. "You told these officers and the watching world that this neighborhood has standards and that Mr. Coleman did not belong," Pierce reminded her. "Do you understand how your words fed into what happened?" Karen swallowed hard. I do now," she said. "I was wrong." "You weren't just wrong," Pierce replied. "You were part of the mechanism. Remember that, too." Herrera raised his radio one last time. "All responding units, clear Maple Drive," he said. "Federal command has the scene." Patrol cars began easing away, lights dimmed. Some officers stared straight ahead, refusing to meet Darius's eyes. Others gave small, shame-filled nods. Neighbors drifted back towards their doorsteps, conversation low and urgent, the story already morphing into a dozen versions they'd tell later. But the cameras had captured one version that wouldn't change. The one that counted. Pierce faced the assembled media and remaining bystanders. "This morning," she said, "you saw how quickly bias can turn a man's home into a crime scene in his own community." She gestured toward Darius again. Assistant Director Coleman met every standard: career, income, property value, and still he was treated as an intruder. Her voice stayed calm, but each word landed like a gavel. If it can happen to him, imagine how often it happens to those without cameras or titles. Today's incident, Pierce concluded, will be dissected alongside dozens of similar encounters, forming the backbone of a federal report on systemic bias in policing. That report will shape funding, training, and oversight for years to come. She stepped back, signaling the end of her statement. The crowd didn't cheer or clap. They simply watched as the federal team began to pack up, leaving behind a quiet street that would never feel quite as innocent or as blind as it had at 9:46 a.m. Sergeant Luis Herrera was busy doing the math in his head. How many ways this morning could wreck the entire department? Budget cuts, federal monitors, lawsuits, maybe even criminal charges. While he silently spiraled, Assistant Director Darius Coleman checked his watch again. The tiny encrypted display shifted. Phase 2. Authorized. Director Naomi Pierce met his gaze and gave the slightest nod. Then she turned back to the crowd, voice steady. "And just so we're clear, this is only the starting point of our inquiry." Pierce let that hang in the air, letting everyone feel the weight of what came next. "We'll be conducting a full review of every arrest, complaint, and documented interaction involving people of color for the last 5 years," she continued. Herrera felt his knees threaten to buckle. That wasn't an investigation. That was a forensic audit of their soul. "On top of that," Pierce added, "Assistant Director Coleman will be working directly with your department on bias training and oversight." Keller's head jerked up from where he sat hunched in his patrol car. "He's going to be working with us?" he croaked, disbelief and dread tangled together. Pierce's mouth curved into something that technically counted as a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Assistant Director Coleman will serve as your consulting supervisor on civil rights compliance," she said. "So yes, Officer Keller, you two will be spending a great deal of time together." The irony was surgical and perfect. The man Keller had shoved, cuffed, and mocked in front of half the neighborhood would now be the official voice in his ear about what was legal and what wasn't. Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez was still recording, tears of vindication tracking down her cheeks. Her comment section pulsed between cheers and fury. Then Chief Langston finally arrived, taking in the line of black SUVs, the cameras, Keller's broken posture. In a heartbeat, he understood his department's image had just imploded live. Pierce was not done. "There's one more detail," she announced, loud enough for the cameras and the gawking neighbors. "This entire operation was carried out with full cooperation from Brookhaven Police Department." Heads snapped toward her, bewildered. "Your department volunteered to take part in this study," she said. "Chief Langston signed the agreement last month." The final twist hit like an explosion. Herrera stared at his chief, stunned. His own boss had invited the feds in and never told them. Langston gave a grim nod, shoulders sagging. "We agreed to federal monitoring," he admitted quietly, "to avoid a larger Justice Department probe." Keller's world finished collapsing. His own leadership had handed the FBI the keys. Darius stepped forward, now addressing the camera lenses directly. Situations like this play out across the country every single day, he said. Black stories that never get filmed, never get believed, never get resolved. His voice carried 27 years of service and a lifetime of judgment. But today, he went on, the system actually responded. Not perfectly, not quickly, but it responded. He turned his full attention to Keller, locking eyes with him. "Officer Keller, you stand at a fork in the road," Darius said. "You can use this as a turning point, or you can keep repeating the same behavior, but from this moment on, there will always be consequences." Meanwhile, Langston walked toward the mobile command truck like a man walking into sentencing. 28 years on the job, his pension, his reputation, everything suddenly felt negotiable. Pierce didn't look up from her tablet as he approached. "Chief Langston," she said, fingers flying over the screen. "Thank you for your cooperation with Operation Mirror." "Director Pierce," he replied carefully, forcing professionalism. "I wasn't expecting a response this extensive. Assistant Director Coleman's unlawful detention triggered our emergency protocols," she answered. "Once that threshold was crossed, the operation escalated automatically." She gestured toward the humming command unit. Inside the mobile HQ, the scene looked more like a courtroom than a truck. Agents tapped away at laptops, cross-referencing databases, overlaying footage with records. Mrs. Alvarez's stream still ran from across the street, now pushing 68,000 viewers who were watching a police department's reputation melt in real time. The comments were vicious. "Brookhaven PD getting dragged. This is what accountability looks like. Black stories better cover this on loop." Pierce began laying out the numbers. "Operation Mirror has been tracking bias patterns for nearly 2 years," she explained. "Brookhaven PD ranks in the 97th percentile for racial disparity in arrests." Langston's jaw clenched. "Those stats can be misinterpreted," he protested weakly. 97%, Pierce repeated, cutting him off. "Meaning only 3% of all departments in our study show worse bias indicators than yours." She pivoted the tablet toward him. Colorful charts glowed. Arrest rates by race, complaint frequencies, force incidents. The picture was damning. "Officer Keller is not a lone bad apple," Pierce continued. "He's emblematic of a pattern." She nodded toward Darius. "Assistant Director Coleman documented 12 similar events in your department over the last 6 months alone." Herrera overheard that number and felt his stomach sink further. 12 incidents, not rumors, not anecdotes. Documented events. "Officer Price," Pierce added, scrolling. 7 discrimination complaints in 18 months. Officer Torres, 9. Officer Kim, 4. Officer Patterson, 6. Officer Whitaker, 11. Each name landed like a hammer blow. It wasn't just individual failures. It was a culture, a system, a habit baked into everyday decisions. An agent stepped forward, short, sharp-eyed, mid-40s. "Agent Lila Monroe, legal counsel," Pierce said by way of introduction. Monroe held a stack of printouts. "We've also analyzed your traffic stop data," she said. "Black drivers are 3.7 times more likely to be searched during routine stops." Another agent added, "And despite the extra searches, contraband is actually found 42% less often." In other words, officers weren't following genuine suspicion. They were following stereotypes. Langston felt the walls draw closer, each statistic another brick sealing them in. Darius stepped nearer, his federal authority now beyond question. "Chief," he said, "we should talk about the money." Langston's face went from pale to ashen. Federal dollars touched everything: cars, radios, vests, training. Brookhaven PD currently receives $2.3 million a year in federal grants, Darius read from his tablet. Civil rights violations can freeze that instantly under federal law. Specifically, he continued, Section 141 of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. Herrera whispered the citation to Price under his breath, like a curse. She knew enough from academy classes to realize what that meant. Consent, decrees, federal monitors, deeply uncomfortable oversight. Darius scrolled. Community policing grants, $412,000. Narcotics enforcement, $638,000. Equipment upgrades, $815,000. Training funds, $327,000. Every number equaled jobs overtime. Survival. Without those grant, he finished, this department folds in under 90 days. Pierce stepped in smoothly. And that's just one side, she said. Civil liability alone from this morning's incident could easily break 7 figures. Langston found his voice. 7 figures? He asked, incredulous. Monroe fielded that one. Federal civil rights suits under Section 1983 rarely start under $1 million, she said. And in this case, the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division would likely handle Assistant Director Coleman's case directly. Outside, the crowd kept swelling. More satellite trucks rolled up every few minutes. National networks had arrived. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all jockeying for the best vantage point. The hashtag Brookhaven FBI had begun trending nationwide, spreading on every platform. Local reporter Tasha Moore was interviewing neighbors Livy, while major outlets replayed Mrs. Alvarez's stream on a split screen. Inside the command vehicle, though, the real power struggle was happening quietly. Contracts, statutes, leverage, all moving beneath the surface like financial tectonics. Pierce shifted gears slightly, her tone cooling from prosecutorial to negotiated. There is another option, she said. Langston leaned forward, desperate for anything that didn't involve full-scale federal takeover. We're prepared to enter into a consent decree, she explained. Voluntary acceptance of federal oversight and reform benchmarks in lieu of more aggressive action. What does that look like in practice? Langston asked. Darius glanced at his notes and stepped back into the spotlight, ready with a list that sounded like a restructuring plan. First, a complete overhaul of your training pipeline, he said. Mandatory 40 hours of anti-bias and civil rights training every year for every sworn officer. Langston winced. That meant a full work week per officer on top of everything else. Second, added Monroe, all body camera footage will be uploaded to a secure federal server. We'll randomly audit at least 20% of your interactions with emphasis on stops in communities of color. Algorithms and monitors would become their shadow supervisors. Third, Pierce said, creation of an independent oversight board with actual teeth, community representatives, regular open meetings, quarterly reports. For the first time, civilians would have real influence over police procedures instead of symbolic advisory roles. Herrera thought about the old locker room jokes, the quiet cover-ups. Those days were dead. And finally, Pierce said, a zero-tolerance policy for verified discrimination. Substantiated complaints will result in immediate disciplinary action, up to and including termination. The old boy's safety net was gone. Langston swallowed. And Keller? He asked, voice heavy. What happens to him? Pierce glanced toward the patrol car. Officer Keller will be treated as a precedent, she said. His behavior will be dissected in federal training materials used around the country. It was a brutal kind of immortality. His worst instincts turned into a slideshow. Darius added, he can keep his badge for now if he completes 200 hours of bias training and extensive community service. Where? Herrera asked quietly, already knowing. In black and brown neighborhoods, Darius answered. The communities he spent his career profiling. It was poetic punishment, redemption through exposure, if he chose to take it seriously. Pierce didn't give the chief time to dwell. If you refuse this path, she continued, we move to titles enforcement, full federal takeover, loss of local operational control. Langston had seen that on the news in other cities, departments turned into puppets run by distant officials. And the financial side, he managed? Darius checked his tablet. Refusal means we bill Brookhaven for the entire cost of Operation Mirror, he said. All 18-plus months, approximately $4.7 million. Langston nearly staggered. That kind of hit wouldn't just wound the department, it would crater the city's entire budget. Pierce added, almost too casually, we'd also pursue criminal referrals for any officers who violated federal civil rights statutes under color of law. Keller's name hovered, unsaid, like a ghost everyone felt. Criminal referrals meant orange jumpsuits, not just lost pensions. Keller could be staring down charges under 18 U.S.C., Part 242, civil rights violations, deprivation of liberty under color of law. Outside, Mrs. Alvarez's viewer count surged past 89,000. Comments poured in from every state. This is how you check racist cops. The FBI doesn't play about civil rights. Finally seeing accountability live, other voices pushed back. Government overreach. Where's due process? The entire country was using Brookhaven as a political Rorschach test. Langston scanned the scene. Herrera sweating through his uniform, Price blinking back tears, Keller slumped and ashen. Nearly 3 decades of building the department's identity, and it was unraveling under the harsh glare of a camera phone and federal statistics. If we accept the decree, he asked slowly, how fast does all this kick in? Implementation starts now, Pierce replied without pause. Assistant Director Coleman will open a permanent field office within 30 days. Darius allowed himself the faintest smile. Now looks like I'll be your long-term neighbor, Chief, he said. Right here in Brookhaven, overseeing compliance every day. It was the final twist of the blade. The same man some residents wanted expelled from their street would now be installed with official authority over their police. Federal monitors will conduct quarterly reviews for at least 5 years, Pierce continued. Extensions are automatic if we see backsliding. 5 years of federal eyes on every arrest, every complaint, every judgment call. Langston glanced at the cameras, the neighbors, the agents moving briskly around him. The choice in front of him wasn't really a choice. Slow, painful reform or catastrophic collapse. Chief, Herrera whispered, stepping close. We won't survive a full takeover. We need the consent decree. Pride tasted like ash, but Langston nodded. Pride wouldn't buy vests or body cams. We accept, he said finally. Brookhaven PD agrees to the consent decree and federal oversight. Pierce's smile this time had real satisfaction. Wise move, she said. Assistant Director Coleman will start planning your transition immediately. She motioned to an agent carrying a leather folio. Inside were documents already prepared, agreements, timelines, legal language. The FBI had known this was the likely outcome from day one. Signature here for voluntary compliance, Monroe instructed, pointing. Initial there for federal monitoring. Date on that line. Each pen stroke felt like handing away a sliver of autonomy, but the alternative was obliteration. Langston signed. Outside, word rippled through the crowd and down the live stream chat. The department had agreed to federal control. Applause broke out, uneven at first, then spreading. Mrs. Alvarez's comments flooded with celebration. This is what accountability looks like. We just watched history happen. Black stories finally getting some justice. But behind the cheering, the grind of real work loomed. Now for immediate steps, Monroe said, shifting a stack of papers. Consequences can't wait for the next council meeting. She walked toward Keller's cruiser. Officer Keller, she called. He looked up, hollow-eyed. You are suspended without pay, Monroe said, voice clinical. At least 6 months, pending completion of required training. How long? He whispered, though she'd already told him. 6 months minimum, Pierce reaffirmed. 200 hours of bias education and 100 hours of community service in predominantly black neighborhoods. The precision wasn't accidental. He would spend his forced downtime face-to-face with the people he'd once treated like suspects. Officer Price, Pierce continued, turning, you'll receive a formal reprimand and 40 extra hours of training within 90 days. Price simply nodded, relief and shame wrestling on her face. Sergeant Herrera, Pierce added, you'll attend federal leadership training focused on intervening when bias surfaces in the ranks. Herrera accepted the assignment with a tight nod. His failure to shut Keller down sooner had not gone unnoticed. Karen Hale tried to slip away again, but Pierce's voice stopped her like a leash. Ms. Hale, HOA coordinator, Pierce called. Karen froze. Your statement that Assistant Director Coleman doesn't belong here is now part of our official record, Pierce said. Karen's complexion drained to paper white. I made a mistake, she stammered. You were discriminatory, Pierce replied bluntly. Your HOA board will receive federal guidance on fair housing laws. Even the neighborhood association wasn't safe from scrutiny. Darius stepped forward with another tablet, ready to outline the next phase. Structural reforms, not just punishments. Brookhaven PD will adopt what we're calling the Coleman Protocol, he announced. Hearing his name attached to a policy made a ripple go through the crowd. It's a bias-free policing framework we've been refining, he explained. 40 hours of bias training every year for each officer instead of 8 hours every 3 years. Langston winced again. Staffing, that would be a nightmare. Body cameras will auto-upload to a federal cloud. We'll audit at least 20% of all encounters for bias indicators. We'll also establish an independent oversight board, Darius continued. 7 community members, selected for actual representation, not just optics. Monthly open meetings, quarterly reviews published for residents to see. For the first time, power would be shared, not hoarded. Monroe stepped back in with the financial details. Federal funding will continue, she said, but only if you hit your benchmarks. Any major violation triggers an automatic review. It was the carrot and stick, written in legal language and dollar signs. Civil liability insurance will rise to $5 million annually, Pierce added. We're also reopening unresolved incidents for federal review. Langston felt dizzy. $5 million in premiums would carve chunks out of the city's budget. As for Officer Keller, Monroe said, He faces potential charges under 18 U.S.C. 242. Keller's breath hitched. He recognized the statute from academy days. Deprivation of rights under color of law, she clarified. Maximum penalties can reach 10 years in federal prison depending on circumstances. However, Pierce added, his full cooperation with reforms will be weighed heavily during charging decisions. A thin lifeline dangled in front of him. Comply completely and he might avoid a cell. Outside, Mrs. Alvarez's stream pushed toward 6 figures in viewership. Comments came from all over the country. This is how you fix policing. Wish the FBI would show up in my city? Real-time justice is wild, others raged. Feds ruining local control. Good cops getting railroaded. Brookhaven had become a symbol. Langston studied his officers, scattered like chess pieces around the scene. Herrera with his damp collar. Price staring at the asphalt. Keller looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in an hour. Since his first day as rookie, Langston had dreamed of building a model suburban department. Now that dream lay in pieces on every major news channel. If we go through with all this, he asked, how long before we're considered in compliance? Monitoring lasts at least 5 years, Pierce said. We'll set up the field office within a month, she continued. After that, quarterly evaluations for 5 years. If we see backsliding, the clock resets. 5 years of federal shadowing. 5 years of statistics, reviews, and reports. Chief, Herrera said quietly, we can adapt. We have to. He wasn't sugarcoating anything. The alternative was no department at all. Langston nodded, as much to himself as to anyone else. Pride would need to take a backseat to survival and growth. Pierce signaled to an agent holding another documents folder. This is your consent decree packet, she said. It outlines every requirement in detail, along with federal enforcement mechanisms. Langston took the folder, its weight disproportionate to its size. As he flipped through, Pierce stepped back outside to face the public again. The crowd buzzed. Media mics extended like spears. Brookhaven PD has agreed to federal reform measures, she announced. A wave of applause rolled through Maple Drive. The livestream comments exploded. This is accountability, one comment read, flashing across Mrs. Alvarez's screen. Black Stories needs to cover this every day, another said. But behind the celebration, the grind of implementation loomed. Monroe moved to the next phase, immediate discipline and restructuring. Suspensions and training schedules will be finalized this week, she said quietly to Langston. Your HR unit will coordinate with our office. Meanwhile, Darius found himself surrounded by cameras. Reporters wanted quotes, reactions, one-liners. He stayed measured, never turning it into a victory lap. Assistant Director Coleman, a reporter called, "What's the first thing you'll change?" Darius thought of Keller's voice calling him boy, of the cuffs digging into his wrists. The mindset, he answered. Policy without a mindset shift doesn't stick. Another reporter shouted, "Do you see this as a personal win?" Darius shook his head. "Justice isn't a personal trophy," he replied. "It's a responsibility." Across the street, Mrs. Alvarez zoomed in, capturing the tired lines around his eyes. This wasn't triumph, it was work. As Pierce and Monroe returned to the command truck, another community figure stepped forward, an older black man, mid-60s, cane in hand. "Name's Harold Bennett," he said to Darius. "Lived here longer than most of these folks." Darius shook his hand firmly. "We've been waiting for someone like you to show up," Bennett said, eyes glistening. "Not just to punish, but to change the rules." Darius nodded. "I can't promise perfection," he replied, "but I can promise persistence." Phones caught every word. Pierce turned to address the crowd again. "We're not here to burn your police department down," she said. "We're here to rebuild it." She outlined community healing efforts, federal mediators to sit officers and residents at the same table, restorative practices for past harm. Inside the command truck, agents began drafting a public FAQ on Operation Mirror. Outside, sunlight glinted off the black SUVs and patrol cars, the whole scene looking like a movie set, except no one here could yell, "Cut!" Darius glanced at his watch. The same Omega that had quietly counted down to this chaos earlier. It now read 11:47 a.m. Not even 2 hours had passed since Keller first stepped onto his driveway, yet everything had changed. No broken bones, no gunshots, no burning buildings, just cameras, documentation, federal leverage, and a refusal to lose his temper. "This framework," Darius told the media cluster, "will be rolled out in the other 46 departments currently on our radar." Keller finally spoke from the open patrol car door, voice cracked. "Assistant Director Coleman," he called weakly. Darius walked over, hands clasped behind his back. "Yeah," he answered. "How long?" Keller asked. "Have you been planning this?" Darius studied him for a beat. "I've been tracking bias patterns for almost 2 years," he said. "But today was just me standing in my driveway." That distinction mattered. Operation Mirror created the opportunity. Keller's decisions created the evidence. "I could have yelled, fought, or filed a lawsuit," Darius continued, loud enough for nearby mics to pick up. "Instead, I gathered proof." The crowd quieted again. "Real reform doesn't come from rage alone," he said. "It comes from strategy." Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably, realizing they'd sometimes preferred venting to organizing. Others nodded, understanding the power in his restraint. Mrs. Alvarez zoomed in tighter, knowing this soundbite would be replayed 1,000 times. Calmness had become his sharpest weapon. Reporter Tasha Moore eased closer, microphone extended. "Assistant Director," she said, "what message does this send to the rest of the country?" Darius looked straight into her camera. "That your story counts," he replied. "Every time you document an injustice, every time you refuse to look away, you ADD a piece to the puzzle." He thought of Mrs. Alvarez lifting her phone instead of turning her back. "This didn't happen because I'm special," he added. "It happened because people were watching." Mrs. Alvarez wiped at her cheeks, overcome by a mix of relief and purpose. Her decision to hit Go Live had launched a federal civil rights operation. Pierce stepped in for a final on-scene announcement. "The Brookhaven model will be presented to Congress next month," she said. "We're recommending it as the baseline for national police reform." Somewhere behind the cameras, Keller swallowed hard. His worst behavior had accidentally helped build the blueprint for change. The universe had a dark sense of irony. Langston tucked his signed consent decree into a folder, realizing his career would now be defined by what he did after this moment. Watching Darius talk with neighbors, listening, nodding, never grandstanding, he felt something unexpected, reluctant hope. Maybe this would make them better, not just smaller. The black tales that played out daily in neighborhoods across America finally had one example where the ending bent toward accountability. Not closure, not perfection, but a start. The crowd slowly began to thin. 6 months later, a new sign hung on a modest brick building near Maple Drive. Brookhaven Federal Field Office, Civil Rights Division. Inside, staff bustled around, whiteboards labeled with case numbers and trend charts. Outside, Darius walked his usual morning route, coffee in hand, greeting the same neighbors who'd watched him get handcuffed. Mrs. Alvarez waved from her porch, her phone now more symbol than shield. The irony was obvious. The federal watchdogs were now part of the neighborhood scenery. The numbers spoke louder than any press conference. Racial profiling complaints had dropped by 78%. Bias-related internal grievances fell by 84%. Surveys showed community trust up by more than 60%. Crime rates, contrary to the fearmongers' predictions, had stayed steady or improved in some categories. During a local interview, Keller, no longer swaggering, visibly humbled, admitted, "Assistant Director Coleman forced me to look in a mirror I'd been avoiding my entire life." The man who once sneered now listened. Keller had completed his required training and most of his community service hours. Now he spent evenings coaching youth basketball at a recreation center in East Brookhaven. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. "I grew up on a diet of fear and prejudice," he told the cameras once. "Turns out, I don't have to keep living on it." Meanwhile, Darius's influence expanded. His low-key, relentless approach became a model for a new generation of federal civil rights investigators. His promotion came with a new mandate. He was tapped to lead the newly created National Bias Prevention Unit within the Civil Rights Division, an expansion of his assistant director role. His wife, Dr. Nia Coleman, a sociologist and community organizer, stood beside him at the small ceremony, her hand tucked in his. Together, they embodied a strategy-first approach to justice: data instead of rumor, policy instead of pure outrage. The Coleman Protocol was now taught in police academies in more than 40 states. His book, Calm in the Crossfire, An FBI Agent's Guide to Systemic Change, became required reading in many leadership programs. It wasn't a memoir of heroic showdowns. It was a manual for staying collected when everything in you screamed to explode. Meanwhile, Mrs. Alvarez's viral video had started a movement. The hashtag #WeDocumentEverything turned into a call to action for civilians. Her clip, now past 12 million views, was used in training from high schools to law schools. The Brookhaven model rolled out in 27 cities over the next year. Some departments welcomed it. Others resisted until lawsuits forced their hand. In city after city, the same pattern emerged. Bias complaints dropped, and crime stats stayed flat or improved. The data undercut the old myth that accountability made communities less safe. Karen Hale had long since resigned from the HOA board and moved to a quieter life in Florida. The new association leadership actually resembled the neighborhood's diversity. Up on Capitol Hill, lawmakers took notice. After months of hearings and testimony, Congress passed the Federal Police Accountability Act. It mandated bias training minimums, automatic federal review triggers, and meaningful community seats at the table for police governance. During one hearing, Senator Elena Castillo quoted Darius directly. "Assistant Director Coleman showed us, you don't have to burn everything down to demand justice," she said. "You can document, persist, and pressure the system to live up to its promises." Standing in his field office, Darius sometimes thought back to the moment Keller shoved him against his own car. How easily it could have gone differently. Rage, resistance, a tragic escalation. Instead, preparation had turned insult into opportunity. "Real power," he told a group of new agents, comes from being ready. Ready with facts, ready with allies, ready with a plan. Systemic change didn't come overnight, but it did come case by case, pattern by pattern, all meticulously recorded. The young black agents who now worked under him looked at Darius as proof that the federal system could be used to protect rather than oppress. His quiet, methodical leadership style offered an alternative to both apathy and chaos. Each investigation they completed added another brick to the growing wall of evidence that reform wasn't just possible, it was measurable. The black stories that had so often ended in despair now had at least one template for a different outcome. During a nationally televised interview, Darius spoke directly to viewers who'd experienced bias. "Your story matters," he said. "Every incident you document, every complaint you file, every time you stand as a witness instead of a bystander, that's data. That's leverage." He thought of Mrs. Alvarez, of Mr. Bennett, of neighbors who chose courage over comfort. "Change doesn't come from a single dramatic moment," he added. "It comes from thousands of recorded moments that the system can no longer ignore." "So share what you've lived through," he urged. "The thing that happened to you might be the missing piece in someone else's case." The feed cut to clips from Brookhaven, Keller's pale face, Pierce's icy stare, Langston's shaking hands, Mrs. Alvarez's trembling phone. "We titled our initiative Black Stories for a reason," Darius said. "These are narratives of pain, but also of resilience, of people who chose to turn humiliation into evidence, and evidence into leverage." The Black Culture Stories channel, once a small online project, had grown into a full-fledged platform highlighting documented bias incidents and wins. Viewers could find Know Your Rights primers, sample complaint forms, and guides on how to film police interactions safely. In one video, Darius stood beside Nia as she explained how community data could shift policy. "We're not telling people not to be angry," she said. "We're saying, don't stop at anger, turn it into a paper trail." The Brookhaven reform data was front and center on the site. Charts showed declining bias complaints, rising trust metrics, stable crime rates. A once hostile department now had officers volunteering for community engagement programs. Keller, of all people, had become one of the most consistent participants. He didn't ask for forgiveness on camera, but he also didn't duck responsibility. "I did harm," he admitted in one clip. "I'm spending the rest of my career trying to repair it." For Darius, the real legacy wasn't the book or the congressional testimony. It was the quieter wins. The kid in East Brookhaven who now saw a cop as a coach, not a threat. The young agent who pursued civil rights work after watching the viral clip. The neighbor who picked up their phone to record, not to scroll past. Every time he walked down Maple Drive and someone nodded respectfully instead of warily, he felt the difference. Subtle, but real. During one final long-form interview for Black Culture Stories, Darius looked directly into the camera, the same way he had the day of the incident. "Your experience is not meaningless," he said. "Every bias you witness, every time you choose to hit record instead of look away, every complaint you file, it all counts. It adds weight." He paused, thinking of that first buzz of his watch at 9:47 a.m. "You don't have to tear everything down to demand justice," he added. "You just have to refuse to forget." He thought of Mrs. Alvarez on her porch, of Keller in his bias courses, of Langston in endless meetings with oversight boards, of Pierce presenting the Brookhaven model to Congress. "So here's my ask," Darius said. Share your Black culture stories. Document what happens. Don't let anyone tell you it's not a big deal. Your receipts might be the proof someone needs to win their case. His voice stayed calm, but the urgency beneath it was unmistakable. Visit our site for resources on knowing your rights, filing reports, and safely recording interactions, he concluded. Because when you see injustice, anger alone isn't enough. He leaned slightly closer to the camera. Don't just get mad, he said. Get evidence. The screen faded to black, replaced by a final title card. Black Culture Stories, where real lives recorded in real time help bend the system toward real justice. And toes. Many of us over 65 have seen enough years to know this hard truth. A black man can be handcuffed on his own driveway, in a good zip code, and still be treated like he wandered in from the wrong side of town. Darius's story reminds us that justice is fragile, that cameras and witnesses can be lifelines, and that calm, disciplined courage can move more mountains than shouting ever will. His quiet strategy turned one humiliating morning into federal reform, proving that our stories, our records, and our persistence still have the power to reshape this country. As someone who's lived through more than a few chapters of American history, how does Darius's calm, strategic fight for justice sit with you? Do you believe that documenting injustice, staying steady, and working through the system can really change how police treat Black Americans? Or do you feel something more drastic is needed? I truly love to hear your own memories and stories in the comments. Please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and share it so more people our age can join this conversation.